Hello and welcome to the Birchal Podcast. My name is Emily, I'm your host, and today I am joined by Jodie Imam, who is the co-founder of Tractor Ventures, which is a company that provides non-dilutive funding to growing businesses. Welcome.
Thanks. Hi, Emily.
Can you give me a bit of an overview about what non-dilutive funding is and why it's important for growing businesses who are looking to scale?
Yeah, so Tractor Ventures exists for companies that we refer to as not being rockets, and rockets are very much companies that are very high growth and often funded by VC capital, which is equity. And so tractor funding is for more sustainably growing companies, founders that want to manage their growth at their own pace. And it's non-dilutive in that it's actually debt, so it's paid back with an interest rate as opposed to with a greater return down the track.
So how does this differ from, say, a bank loan, for example?
The difference, you could think of it as a bank loan. The difference is we're backing technology companies that banks often can't understand and then therefore assess. And it's not secured like a bank would secure it. It's also super simple, like it takes a couple of days to get approved and money dispersed. So the security we take is only over the business. There's no personal assets. There's no directors' guarantees or anything like that.
Okay, so what kind of criteria do you look for when you're taking on a business to fund?
Yeah, so businesses need to be making some revenue already, and so our threshold is a minimum of $50,000 per month. It doesn't have to be recurring. It needs to be sort of regular-ish, not hugely lumpy, but doesn't have to be recurring. So at least $50,000 a month. There needs to be still some money in the bank, so we can't help when you've run out of money. So it's good to pre-plan for this type of funding and have at least 3 to 6 months of cash runway in your business. And we can only fund Australian and New Zealand-based companies at the moment.
Okay. And obviously in this kind of debt funding, you're taking on quite a bit of a risk from a business perspective yourselves.
Yes.
How do you manage that risk?
Yeah. So we've built a software platform that helps us monitor the loans. So when you apply for a tractor loan, you connect your Xero file to us, and so we are getting a read of your financials on a weekly basis, and so we manage the risk by watching that performance over time. And it's also that we just have this understanding of what it takes to run a tech company, having done it multiple times ourselves. So we mitigate a lot of the risk in our initial assessment to make sure that these are stable companies based on our own experience and knowledge that this company will be around long enough to repay the loan.
Have you had experience in companies that weren't able to repay the loan?
Yes, we have, and that's built into our model. That's a lending business. There is going to be a default rate, and so we've modelled a 5% default rate. We're currently sitting at under 2%, so it's only actually been a handful of companies that haven't been able to repay. And
so you're doing your job well.
We are doing our job well. So far, so good.
Great.
So in some cases, usually if we're not going to be getting paid at all, the company's gone into administration. And in some cases, during that administration process, there is funds that can be redistributed. And so we have been able to get some of the funds back during that process on a couple of them, and some we haven't. Okay,
that's interesting. And in terms of that business model, obviously you've got that kind of kitty, would you say, set aside just in case these risks do actually eventuate.
Yeah.
Who came up with that business model? Was that yourselves in terms of like for your personal business, and is it something that you've learned as a business founder previously that there are these risks in play?
Well, it's not a new business model as such. It's a classic lending structure that we've adopted. It's new to us because this is the first time we've ever been a lender. But we've built a typical debt warehouse structure. So there are multiple layers of debt providers and securitization. So the risk is measured out over many layers. And so, when we first started, we were just doing loans off our balance sheet as a test to see, just to get started. And then we built this securitized warehouse. So it's all managed through a trust and trustee, and it's all very formal, and there's parameters that we can lend through and that we manage like daily.
Do you have a limit to how many businesses you can help per calendar year, say?
No, we don't.
Oh, wow.
Actually, we're very fortunate. We have fantastic partners and capital backers, so we don't ever have the problem of not having enough money. What we have to do as a business is just manage the amount of money that we have, because we pay for it too. So we don't want to have too much, just like a founder should think about, how much debt they take on. Ideally, you only take on the amount that you can spend pretty quickly and have that returning on your investment.
Okay, interesting. So what prompted you to go to the other side? From founding a business, obviously you've founded Tractor Ventures, but from running a business yourself that you eventually exited out of, why did you decide, I want to be a lender?
Great question. So I'd run two businesses, or multiple businesses, but the last two weren't my own. One we sold, it was a marketplace. We built the tech platform and sold that to Airtasker. The other one was a co-working space that we ran. It was bootstrapped, and we ran that we grew it organically, ran it profitably over 8 years until COVID hit. And so it was just after that Matt Allen, one of my co-founders, he's the visionary. He's the one that came up with the idea, saw the gap that there's all these founders out there that need funding that don't fit the VC model. And he knew that, there was an opportunity to be able to provide some sort of alternative capital to the 99% of founders and companies that don't fit the VC model.
Yeah, right.
But he also knew he couldn't run it. Like, he needed someone who was an executor to match, his talents as a visionary. And so he thought of me, and we had a chat, and straight away when he said, what do you think about this idea? As a bootstrap founder in the past myself, I was like, oh my God, if this was around when I was growing my first companies, would have been amazing.
Yeah.
So, and actually I did take a Moolah loan at one point at the co-working space, which worked really well. It worked really well. So I did understand how it can be used effectively, and so straight away I was like, I love this idea. And we didn't really know at that point what it was going to look like, and that would be effectively become a non-bank lender, but that's often the case when you start.
So what kind of businesses are right for this type of funding versus the ones that are absolutely wrong for it?
Yeah. So we talk about companies being tech-enabled, and that's just because if you're maybe a hairdressing salon, for example, your ability to grow fast and have that scale is less, and our understanding of your business model is less as well. But it doesn't have to be unique technology. We support e-commerce companies, any sort of use of tech off the shelf that's helping you get some scale. That's the sort of company. So it's very broad. We're industry agnostic across every sector. When you wouldn't use our money, it's really to think about using tractor funding for certain types of activities, not whether you're a tractor company or you're not. Are you using this money for a quick ROI? Because if you're wanting to build out an engineering team, for example, and it's going to take 3 to 6 years to get your investment back on that build, you wouldn't use debt for that, because you're paying interest on something for a long time before you're seeing a return. But if it's putting another salesperson in the field, or you've nailed your advertising campaign and you just want to feed it more so that you're bringing your revenue in quicker, that's when you should think about using this type of funding.
Okay. So I know you're really passionate about female-founded businesses. Obviously, you're a female founder yourself. Do you find that you're able to, fill that gap in the market where female founders have traditionally found it really difficult to actually get funding for their companies?
We are. We're only at about 25% though of our portfolio being women founded. So there's just so many issues with this problem that we face, and pipeline's one of them. I think we're just trying as much as we can to be that voice for it, and be that welcoming space for women to come and talk to us, because I think that is one of the problems that is stopping investment in women, is that there's a lot of men investors, and there's so many bad stories, and it's, you hear how hard it is and how long it takes to raise capital, and then you go and have 100 meetings with all of these investment companies who are mostly men, and they all say they don't understand it, and the answer's no, and so you've wasted all of this time and effort. So one of the things that we can do at Tractor is just talk about, how much we want to help women-led business, how we know that women run better businesses, and that we've got capital that helps for certain activities.
What's the strategy that you use to get more female founder businesses into your pipeline? I'm particularly intrigued because at Birchal, we struggle as well. And that's the interesting part. A lot of people come to us and say, what are you doing to help female founder businesses? And we say, we'd love to have more. We're just not sure how to get them into the pipeline and enable them to grow and scale. What strategy are you using at the moment? Is it a marketing strategy? Are you getting out there doing a bit more business development? What are you looking at?
Yeah, it's a mixture of social media, being at events, including women at these events, profiling our women founders that have already taken our funding. Just trying to, you can't be what you can't see. So we can just put all of these faces and stories out there, then hopefully that can resonate with other women that might be or may not have thought that they could apply for this sort of funding.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you in that you can't be what you can't see, and it is such a shame. Interestingly enough, we talk about it a lot behind the scenes of the podcast because I do find it really difficult to get women on the podcast because they find it so difficult to talk about their companies. They don't feel as though they are successful enough and that people would want to hear their story. Whereas I have men in my inbox every day asking if they can come on it and share their stories. Why do you think that is, that women feel as though they're not worthy of telling their story?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at an event on Friday with One Roof and Mayflower, and Kim Teo from Mr. Young was there, and she had an interesting perspective that there's two skill sets that men typically have or have been trained in that women don't. And one of them is product and engineering, and one of them is sales and that sort of salesmanship. And so when you have like those skills because you haven't been trained in those skills, I think there is, I do agree that there is that lack of confidence or that's not me, therefore I don't do that sort of attitude.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I often find myself giving our female founders who come through the Birchal platform a real pep talk, and I feel like a therapist half the time because I'm saying, your business is going great. Look at what you've achieved so far. But I do think they get a lot of feedback from a lot of different funding options, you know, when they are going to VCs saying, oh, there's a lot of risk here. Have you addressed this? Have you addressed that?
Yeah.
Do you feel as though male founders are asked the same questions, or are they given different opportunities?
Yeah, there's that TED talk on this. It's the bias in the questioning, and so men often get asked, you know, in a positive light questions, whereas women get asked the same questions in a more negative light. So naturally women then are on the back foot when they're trying to justify the answer, as opposed to being, oh, no, very positive and there's no risk to worry about. So I think that definitely does exist. Yeah, there's a lot of battles that we have to go through.
For sure. Did you have to get funding initially for your first two businesses that you founded?
No, they were self-funded. It got to a point, we were about 3 years in at Occasional Butler, and it got to a point, Airtasker was also they launched just after us, and so they were well-funded and really eating into our market share, and so it got to a point where we realised we weren't going to win this race unless we raised some capital. And we were running out of our own funds by this point as well. So we did go down the path of raising capital, and as part of that I hired an advisor because at the time, I didn't want to go and ask directly anyone for money. I just thought that is the worst thing to ever have to do. Just lack of confidence, I guess. And also I think this is common as well, like having the responsibility of someone else's money.
That's scary.
Yeah, and so we were introduced to a man who I now refer to as a shark, who I paid a lot of money to help us raise capital on our behalf, and it was terrible, and we didn't get any investment through that path, and it was just such a waste of time.
What was his role?
So he was like a capital advisor, and so he promised that he had all these investors and he would help us do our pitch deck, and yes, it was a big rookie error, but part of that was we needed to appoint a board, and this actually was the sort of one of the last resorts, I guess, in his toolbox, which did work, which was, we had we could bring in capital by hiring a board, and those board directors would invest. And so that we were able to actually, I was very surprised. We advertised on Women on Boards and the ASIC board directory for some directors, and we got so many applications from really great people. We were very lucky. We got very great board directors who were really experienced, willing to invest, and then we started sort of working out with them who are we going to approach for investment. And one of the options was to talk to Airtasker about an acquisition because, Tim had been approaching us since day one. So it was a very real conversation to be had at that time. And it just so happened that it was very good timing for Airtasker because they were doing a raise of about, I think it was 20 million, and they were bringing in Asian investors at that time. And so to get the extra growth from our community and the big story about acquiring one of the key competitors worked very well timing-wise. So that was the best option. So
How
we
did
actually
that feel,
avoided
though?
it. How did it feel?
Getting acquired, do you feel, is it sad, like losing the business, or is it exciting because you're like, brilliant, I grow to this stage and now I can cash out kind of thing?
Yeah, it was good timing. I was pregnant with our third baby at the time, and actually it was a difficult pregnancy, and so I was very tired, and it was just I think it was just really good timing holistically in our lives as well as it was a great story. And I felt kind of good about it in that at least our dream continued. It wasn't with us. It wasn't my thinking that we would be there when Tim was. But at least the dream went on, like we did really want to solve this problem. And so at least it could still be solved. So that was a good feeling.
That's interesting. So what was the gap between selling your business to Airtasker and then starting Tractor Ventures?
Well, that one we sold in 2014, so that was a 6-year gap. But we had started Depot 8, the co-working space, at the same time as Occasional Butler because we realised building a marketplace business was going to take a long time to return any sort of personal income.
Hard work. They're really hard work.
It's very hard. So you need a lot of transactions to get it to a point of profitability. So to pay the rent, we realised we needed to do something else. And my co-founder was my ex-husband, and so we were the two breadwinners for our family. So we were both in it, and so we came across this idea of co-working, and so we started Depot 8 to cover our life cost so that we could keep building the marketplace, which thankfully did work.
Yeah, thank God. And then I guess obviously COVID happened and you had to pivot.
Well, we closed down the co-working space when the pandemic hit. We had to.
How long did it take you to realise that you were going to have
3
to close?
weeks. We just pulled the pin straight away.
Wow.
Yeah, we actually had just nearly sold it, which was very unfortunate. The landlord ruined that deal at the last minute, and so the sale fell through. And then a few months later, COVID hit, and so we knew we were not going to be able to bunker down with this landlord at all. And so and the lease was coming up anyway, and so we just pulled the pin very quickly. Yeah, it was brutal, but I'm glad we did because I think we would still be struggling with occupancy now, and we would certainly have no money.
Oh, that's crazy. It's interesting. I think some business founders, I find that they tried to stick it out too long and it was severely detrimental to the business and they weren't able to pivot from it and grow. So was that kind of the decision that pushed you down, another path essentially?
Well, actually we talk about the Depot 8 experience and we fell into that. We should have actually sold that company a couple of years earlier. And we did explore it, but I, at that point, was a bit greedy. I was like, that sort of business, it's a broker. It's a business broker who comes along and says, I'll give you 1 times your profit. And I'm like, well, I'll just keep running it for another year then, Sure. So it just didn't make sense financially and I wanted a bigger return. And so, but actually we probably, in hindsight, should have sold it a little earlier.
You're never going to know at the end of the day when's the right price.
Everything's easy in hindsight, yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's the difficult part is knowing when to stick or when to sell.
Yeah.
And a lot of founders find that really tricky. It's interesting. We get that question a lot from investors is, what's your exit strategy? How are you going to know as an early stage startup? It's so speculative. There's obviously so many opportunities to eventually exit, hopefully, if everything goes well and you make the right decisions in that business and nothing comes up, like COVID, for example, that is completely unexpected and unplanned for. I mean, how could you plan for that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, if you did plan for that, I don't think you'd get out of bed, would you? Oh,
gosh.
If you're planning for doomsday. But I think that's true. Like you don't know the exit strategy, you don't know the whole journey, you don't know what twists and turns will happen. But I do talk a lot to founders about just knowing what's your dream outcome at least, because the VC path is very good if you want to ring that bell on the NASDAQ. That's when you should be going down that path, and you need to kind of know that sort of directionally. If you think a $50 million exit and you own most of the company would be a good outcome, that's great. I mean, I would think that's a good outcome, but that's a different path, because a VC will never let you sell at that level because it's not big enough.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you're talking to people about the plan that they should kind of take at that early stage, what do you ask them about their business so that you know really the advice to give, particularly for people who are coming to you for funding? If you have a chat to them and say, hey, this isn't actually quite right for you, what are those answers that they're giving that gives you that indication that it's not right?
I think it is just that goal, that ambition, because that's an easy rule out. Like if you don't want to be a rocket ship and landing on the moon and ringing that bell at the NASDAQ, then you're not going to get VC funding. It's just not the right fit for you.
Okay.
And then if you don't have the most brand new technology or biggest unlock, biggest market opportunity, then again, VC is not the right path for you. I'll talk about crowdfunding a lot to founders as well. Like if you have a consumer base or a large, customer base that could get involved in your business, then crowdfunding is definitely a good way to build that community and that loyalty and get that traction. Tractor funding is beneficial to any company for the right purpose. It's really about what you're using the debt for.
Right.
Yeah, so it's not like Tractor is a path versus a rocket path. It's just thinking about, what you're using the money for. What's that use of funds? And so that's what I'll tend to talk about. And if the use of funds is, open a new market somewhere, then you wouldn't use debt for that. That you need equity, and then I would start to talk to what would be the right investor, because it might not be always the big VCs. It might be crowdfunding. It might be family office, angels. It might be just that one person that has a personal connection to the problem you're trying to solve that wants to help you.
What are the percentage of conversations that you have that actually come through you for funding versus ones that you sent on a different path?
I think it's changing. When we first started Tractor, people didn't know what it was, and so the inquiry was more about, what is this? Okay. Whereas now people are coming to us knowing that they're ready to take debt, and then we're only saying it's not right if their financial fundamentals aren't stacking up. Like they just have run out of runway, or sometimes their unit economics actually don't work. So by us, it costs them more to sell the thing than it does to sell it. So the cost is higher than the price, and therefore if we put debt on top of that, then that's just going to rapidly help it die. So we would definitely not touch that, not only for our sake but for the founder's sake. If those fundamentals aren't right, there's no point pouring fuel on that.
I think what you said about coming to you when people need funding, they've come to the end of their runway. It's interesting. I think the rhetoric now is always be raising. Raise when you don't need the money, so that you've got that pool of funds there, so that you're not desperately trying to raise, because particularly VCs can smell the desperation, and obviously you're going to meeting after meeting trying to get funding, and if they can smell that you're desperate, and there's a reason that they call them venture sharks. If there's a drop of blood in the water, they're going to take it for all they can. And I think that there's not a lot of advice being given to founders about that and, avoiding that situation entirely. Do you find that a big part of your job is trying to educate people before they come to you when you're going out to these events and meeting with people in the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Like the other night, we're at the Press Play event, and these are early stage women, like early stage founders who are women starting out, and I find a lot of my time is actually that education piece, and that I love because I just I'm passionate about helping, especially women founders, not to avoid the mistakes that I made. And so that is a big part of it. Even if they're not going to be ready for tractor money for a few years, I just want them to know that they've got options and to think about their capital journey from the start and not necessarily go down a path that's not going to be the right fit.
I think there was an interesting analogy given by Tick the other night, in particular at that event, which I really loved, was that when you're speaking to potential investors who might be coming on from a strategic perspective as well, not just a financial perspective, you want to act like you're dating them. You want to get to know them before you commit to them long term, because at the end of the day, they might not be the right fit for your company. And if you're coming across as desperate, they're not going to want you. And I thought it was so funny. It was so interesting and so on the mark. And it's an interesting piece of advice that I often give to founders who are coming through the Birchal platform. Is they say, how do I talk to a high net worth investor? I say, don't act desperate. We always say, ask for money, get advice. Ask for advice, get money.
Yes.
And it rings true every single time.
It does.
What's the key piece of advice that you give to founders if you say, hey, tractor might not be right for you, but perhaps you want to go down this path of fundraising? What advice do you give to them when approaching a high net worth investor?
I think definitely that exact same advice. I've seen that work so well many times. Ask for advice, don't ask for money, and definitely don't ask for money. You're not. It's like dating. You're not asking for marriage on the first date.
No, I mean, I hope not.
I can't imagine it's successful. If it is, I'd be worried. It's definitely that building a relationship over time. You've got to build trust. So, I think it's just establishing that relationship, even just as a colleague or a friend, or just establishing some sort of common ground. Maybe it's the problem that you're trying to solve, and then it's keeping your word. So you say to that investor, okay, this year I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then at the end of the year you've gone and done X, Y, and Z, and you update them, or absolutely taking their advice and then going and using that advice and then coming back and saying, I used your advice and it was great, like that. I give advice so much, and I can count on one hand how many times people have come back saying, I used your advice and it was great. Maybe it's not very good advice, but
well, obviously it is if people are saying it's great. That's fine.
But that's just a nice thing to do for relationship and trust building. Is actually just looping back to that conversation and say, 100%. I did what you suggested and it was really good, because then everyone feels good about that, and that's building the trust that you can execute. Because with this, ideas are a dime a dozen. Everyone can have an idea, but it's the execution that's the difference.
Definitely. And I find that that's a really big part of clients that come through equity crowdfunding, is we say engage your shareholders after you're finished your raise, because you don't want to just be taking the money, giving them share certificates, and that's that. You want to be showing that you're keeping your word. You are taking the money that's been raised, you're doing what you said you were going to do, and you're saying, hey, do you have any advice? Where do you think we should be going? What's the next direction for us? And involving them in that process, so that it's kind of you're sowing the seeds from your investor base, which is so valuable. I think a lot of people forget about that.
Yeah.
And they think, I'm just going to get this funding and I'll just do what I want with it, and I'm not going to take any regard for my investors. And I think it can really burn a lot of bridges for young entrepreneurs and people starting out with these small businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very short-sighted. And if you're going to raise again, often it's in the shareholder agreement, or you would naturally go to your existing shareholder base first, in the next round. So, and they do want to help. I recently started a new newsletter, and the first one was addressing how tough it is in the market and how much our growth has slowed down. And it was risky because it was to our shareholders as well as our network, our community. And it was risky because, you don't want to tell your shareholders things aren't going, gangbusters like they were.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's just amazing. Like, I got so many responses from shareholders saying, how can we help? They do want to help. They want to come on the journey. More often than not, they're not just a check. So, yeah, it's definitely, it's an ongoing relationship for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that that's really good advice as well, is to look toward your future. And obviously, funding is the beginning for a lot of companies. But if you don't plan for your future and your funding future, if you're going to have to do further rounds of fundraising, you can really end your journey right there at the end of the day. And I think that that's really problematic for a lot of founders too, is that they don't think far enough into the future.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm an angel investor as well, and I can imagine if a founder came back to me after my last check, 3 years later and said, oh, hey, I need more money, and I hadn't heard from them in between, I can't imagine I would feel like giving them more money.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's probably a missing piece for a lot of people, is they don't understand that that's a key element of growing your business, is communication, network building, and just kind of nurturing those who've helped you from the beginning as well, and thanking them for their contribution and keeping them in the loop of what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's not hard. I mean, I know with crowdfunding, it's a lot of investors, but even at Tractor, we've got over 150 angel and family office investors in us. So it's hard to keep 150 personal relationships going all the time, but it's actually, it doesn't take too much. It's regular shareholder updates. It's invitations to different events. It's they're on our newsletter that we send out to everyone, and it's just that they're hearing the story and the updates as a group. It doesn't have to be too intensive.
How often do you reach out to them?
Like one-on-one?
No, just even from like a newsletter perspective, just shareholder updates.
Yeah, we do a quarterly shareholder update, and then we do a monthly newsletter.
Oh, great.
And then we'll invite them, not all of them all at once, but we'll invite them to investor breakfasts or lunches, or we'll invite them to events we're running, so that they can also meet the founders that we're investing in. So
that's brilliant.
Yeah.
I guess meet each other at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. That's right, yeah.
That's huge. So obviously a big part of what you do is bringing people together to network. How valuable is that for business founders and finding your crowd essentially?
Yeah, I think it's hugely valuable. We've had sessions just on mental health, and we've had over 60 of our founders join a call just to talk about how tough it is, mentally to go through all these ups and downs of this roller coaster ride. And just, we often do like breakfast, like intimate events as well as bigger ones. But, when we do sit down and have a breakfast or a lunch, and we can all just talk about challenges. We did one recently, and every single founder on this table for 20 had the exact same challenges. It's just tough, like sales cycles are slow, cash flow is hard. Raising money is extremely difficult and time consuming. Like, everyone had exactly the same problems, and everyone left like feeling so good to be supported and not the only one with these problems, because you get in your own head and it's like, oh my God, I'm failing. I can't raise money. My cash flow's hard. Like, I can't get these orders in from customers like I was. And so to hear that everyone else is having the same experience just helps.
Yeah, that you're all in it together.
Yeah,
and
it's not just you.
Yeah. So I think it's really lonely for a lot of founders, because nobody's checking in to see how they're doing.
No.
And to see, are they okay? Do they need some help? Here's some feedback, whether it's positive or negative, but at the end of the day, it's constructive. And I think that that's it's really hard. Do you find that you give different advice to female founders versus male founders?
Yes. It's probably more that I'll talk about just finding the confidence and, that upselling that we need to do that men naturally just have. So I think that's where the advice differs.
Right.
More on that personal side of pitching and selling.
Yeah, it's interesting as well. I think that you find the way that women also navigate working with a team when they're a founder as well is inherently different. Because I do think that there's that maternal aspect that a lot of women have, and a lot of people say your business is like your baby, and then you get employees and you've got to work out how you're going to work with them in a way. And there is that nurturing element from a lot of female founders that you don't find in a lot of male founders. But with that comes a very different dynamic between somebody who is trying to lead an organization from simply a business perspective versus somebody who perhaps cares more deeply about the well-being of the people that are working for them. How do you find that affects businesses in that way in terms of from an employee perspective? Do you think people value working under a female founder more, a male founder? What's been your experience?
Yeah, I think so. Like if I can think about my co-founder Matt and I, Matt, I'll wake up in the morning and the first thing that I think about is the people. Like I'll be thinking about, oh my God, I haven't done this, booked the Christmas party, or what about this person? Are they okay after that thing that happened? And on the week, when I've got downtime, my mind goes to the people and are they okay? And have I done enough for them? Whereas Matt will think about the numbers a lot more. Like he'll just be in his spreadsheet in his downtime, just looking at where's the risk, where's the next raise, what's, right. He's way more spreadsheet and I'm way more people. So it's extremely different.
Maybe it's a beautiful blend of the two.
Yes. We're lucky in that way.
Yeah. That's a really interesting juxtaposition that you bring to the team.
Yeah, but I think also he comes from a technical background and our engineers especially, I think our people, all of them, love that visionary side to Matt as well. Like it's exciting. Matt will say, okay, the next frontier is going to be this, and we can all get excited about that. So that's a different element that he brings, whereas my view is more just on that execution piece and what we're going to achieve this year and next, and they're more shorter term milestones than the big blue sky stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes so much sense. I think you're so lucky in that sense that you've got a founder that complements you so much.
Yes.
When you're talking to people, and if this is the last piece of advice you could give on the podcast today, how would you go about approaching funding for your business from the ground up?
Yeah.
Obviously, you've mentioned that there's a huge education piece that people are really missing. Where do you think they should start? What questions should they be asking before they go and start raising funds for their business?
Yeah. It's funny, I was talking a little bit about this morning with Michael from Antler, who was telling me, at Antler, because I do think that a good place to start is accelerators and incubators, and Antler's that very from inception point, and you've got to be full-time to do that program, so you have to quit your job. So the first thing is, and this has been in my experience as well, the first thing is you've got to put your own money in. Like I think most investors are going to want to see you've got some skin in the game one way or another. And then I often talk about just finding that one high-profile investor, ideally, who resonates with the problem, like on an emotional level, that will put in money, even if they put in the smallest check and allow you to use their name, then you can start to create sort of that credibility that other investors will want to follow. And then it's very much it's a dance. You've got to create FOMO, so that you sort of have to have everything lined up and then start the raise with a very short time frame on it, so that there's that competitive tension. Because if it's just a constantly open raise and there's no other investor to get excited about, it's hard, I think, for investors to take the leap. Yeah, there's no FOMO. Yeah, and investors will follow other investors that they respect. It just becomes a no-brainer for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on today. I knew from the first time I heard you speak that you've just got such a wealth of knowledge for founders, and I think it's really inspirational to see your journey, where you've come from, what you've achieved, and what you can bring to the table for a lot of people who are trying to live out their dreams as well. So thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.